Greetings, fellow gamers. I'm the Soulsborne Seeker, and today I'll be reviewing Beyond the Ice Palace 2, a dark fantasy action platformer RPG game with strong Metroidvania elements, developed by Storybird Studio and released on the 10th of March 2025 for PC, PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, as well as the Xbox Series X and Series S. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is the sequel to Beyond the Ice Palace, a short action platformer game released back in 1988. The story begins by explaining the events of the first title, which go as follows. A long time ago, in a land tormented by an evil witch, the gods chose a champion by striking him with a divine arrow, which bestowed upon him the power necessary to destroy the witch and save the realm. Following his victory, our unnamed hero became the king, leading his domain to prosperity. Each year, the gods kept striking him with their sacred arrow, ensuring he maintained their divine blessing. However, one fateful day, a traitor stole an arrow from the heavens, cast a curse upon it, and then struck the king straight to his heart, killing him. With his power no longer protecting the land, a demonic army descended upon the kingdom under the leadership of the king's former advisors, the Four Pages, now turned traitors and tainted by infernal power. In a last-ditch effort to save the world, a group of sages performed a ritual meant to bring the king back from the dead in order for him to exact vengeance on those who wronged him. Alive once again, the king arms himself with the very chains that kept his corpse on display and embarks on a path of violent revenge. The game's narrative is mainly presented via dialogue and environmental storytelling, and I have to say that it went a bit deeper than I had anticipated, functioning both as a framework for your rampage against legions of demons, but also doing a decent job of fleshing out certain characters even through a few lines of dialogue, which I really appreciated. The story was further supported by the overall vibe of the title, with its dark fantasy sensibilities permeating every inch of its decrepit world in a foreboding way that truly makes you feel in constant danger despite your own brutality. Part of this oppressive feeling is definitely owed to the game's visual presentation, which utilizes an incredibly detailed pixel art style that successfully fleshes out the horrors plaguing the setting when paired with the moody color palette utilized. Speaking of setting, I was very much pleased by the visual diversity between all of the biomes I got to thoroughly explore, each one appropriately distinct from the other in terms of atmosphere, pitfalls, and enemies present, with the creepy and foreboding feeling of the graveyard strongly juxtaposed by the fiery inferno plaguing the capital, which, in turn, contrasted the bleak, poisonous ambience of the corrupted swamp and gothic authority of the manor, just to give a few examples. The game's world is mostly linear in traversal, though each area features a good degree of exploration in order to uncover its secrets and is not merely a stage that you beat and move on, since you can very much revisit each biome as they are connected together in semi-open world fashion by featuring either direct connectedness or connectedness via the game's incredibly useful and to the point fast travel system, which can be utilized by accessing the game's save points in the form of ritual circles and thrones of stone, resulting in what feels like a fusion of the Metroidvania and Crest-like genres. That being said, linearity is definitely prevalent here, but backtracking will absolutely be necessary if you wish to get all the game's secrets once you gain the appropriate traversal abilities to access previously inaccessible areas. In terms of exploration, the game very much rewards you for thoroughly investigating each biome in the form of 7 different types of collectibles, namely power crystals, power crystal fragments, accessories, pearls, consumables, special moves, and treasure, all of which were scattered across each biome, sometimes in effectively concealed areas that required keen observation and some acrobatics to reach, which I thought added a very nice sense of depth to the setting. Power crystals can be used to upgrade your statistics by visiting throne save points, with said statistics divided into vitality, physical, attack power, gastronomy, and rage, each one elevating an aspect of your character, such as vitality for health points, physical for stamina, and gastronomy for increased health recovery by food pickups. Power crystal fragments can be given to a certain alchemist when gathered in groups of 5 in order for him to create a power crystal. Accessories are items you can buy from merchants, which give you certain benefits such as providing an increase in defense and attack power. Said accessories are immediately equipped the moment you purchase them and can't be removed, with a total of 4 of them being obtainable and which you can then upgrade once each by using the very rare pearl collectible at the alchemist's lab. Said pearls are the trickiest items to locate and do need a bit more effort to obtain, but are very much worth it since the boost you earn from your upgraded accessories is considerable. Consumables correspond to one-use items that are meant to help you in some way, such as a blood chalice which, once used, allows you to immediately come back from the dead in full health, and a candle that that teleports you to the last save point you utilized. Special moves grant you specific traversal abilities like the fabled double jump, which then help you access previously inaccessible places, such as a chest atop a dried well I came across in the capital. Finally, treasure is necessary in order to make purchases from the various merchants you'll meet on your journey. Most of the above items can either be found inside chests, purchased by sellers, or dropped from enemies, with the exception of the special move, which is given to you by an imposing knight. Platforming wise, if you were among the people that watched my preview video on the game, you'll remember that I was quite critical of the acrobatic segments present in Beyond the Ice Palace 2, most of which necessitate the use of your chains in combination with a variety of different rings scattered across the map from which you can swing. Before I go into this, I do wish to give props to the developers for listening to feedback and eventually making several improvements on this element of the game. With that in mind, things are still far from efficient, so let's dive into it. One thing I immediately noticed from the start of my playthrough was that the protagonist's movement was quite heavy and somewhat sluggish, and the jump felt a bit floaty, which, to be honest, I got used to quite quickly. That being said, while said heavier mode of movement wasn't a problem for me when it came to combat, and I even grew to like it there since it gave the battles some heftiness, it was a different story for the platforming challenges present here. One of my original complaints was that the reduced animation fluidity kept playing mind games with my timing in a lot of situations, with me frequently missing the rings when trying to swing across 2 or 3 of them, even though I was certain I had pressed the button to throw the chain on time. I'm happy to say that this issue has vastly improved in the final version of the game, most likely by the developers making the ring contact boxes a bit better, which did allow me to pull off some elaborate stunts, though there were still instances of missing chain shots I thought would certainly land. The second issue I had voiced was what I perceived as occasionally unresponsive actions. This was most prevalent with the game's ledge grab action, which, while somewhat improved in this version of the game, is still an issue. More specifically, there were times when my character would grab a ledge normally as expected, and others when a similar ledge would become untouchable even though I wasn't doing anything differently. This happened quite a few times throughout my playthrough, both with regular ledges as well as with what the game called background ledges, which you are supposedly able to grab onto from various parts of their length. This issue became quite accentuated when I obtained the double jump, with our protagonist sometimes refusing to grab onto a ledge following that action, which became somewhat of an issue during the second part of the game that is quite platforming heavy. The final complaint voiced during the preview had to do with an aspect of platforming that caused a lot of frustration, called the grab dash. Early in the game, the tutorial informs you that when your chain is tied to a ring, you can press a specific button to propel yourself upward, thus dashing after grabbing the ring. While that is all well and good, what the tutorial didn't mention then and still doesn't mention now is that said propelling can happen from any current angle you're holding the ring from, not just from below. On that note, during the preview version, the chain kept drawing me in and propelling me vertically regardless of my actual angle on it, which, thankfully, has mostly been fixed in this final version of the game. The persistent problem with this ability is that the character has almost zero air control when propelled, which keeps you from moving while airborne following this action and just sends you falling back down like a rock. Your traversal abilities do kind of circumvent this problem by allowing more air control when double jumping and dashing, but even then I'd still sometimes go vertical instead of an angle, leading me to believe that some fine-tuning needs to happen when it comes to directional movement so that it becomes less rigid and more intuitive. Finally, I believe the tutorials could be a bit more efficient here by providing some more specific information in relation to your movesets, and it would also be good to get some hints about certain moves that are never explained, at least to my experience. For example, it is never explained that your dodge dash can also be used while airborne to perform a mild version of air dash, which I understand some people will figure out on their own, but others might not and end up stuck in certain places, such as this particular situation where you need to air dash over some thorns to progress. Overall, platforming greatly improved since my preview of the game and is now very much manageable, but it's not fully there yet, and it needs to be, given how platforming reliant the game becomes in its latter parts. In terms of combat, on the other side, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 was quite fun and to the point, albeit on the simpler side of things. Overall, the chains are the only weapon available, which admittedly have several uses. First and foremost, you can attach them to anything that has a ring handle on it and interact with it, including chests, doors, stone slabs, platforming rings, as well as enemies, of course. In terms of more direct punishment, the chains are used to whip your foes to submission in semi-ranged fashion by a single repeated attack. The hero also has a heavy assault, which is necessary to break down obstacles, shields, as well as finish off enemies in something reminiscent of an execution when the basic attack is not enough. In addition, a very useful move is the chain spin, which has you swirling your weapon in order to destroy incoming danger such as falling debris as well as projectiles, which I found to be a lifesaver in certain situations. Finally, killing enemies as well as picking up a blue potion that may occasionally drop from breakable objects fills up your rage meter, which, when full, allows you to activate rage mode, at which point your damage output increases. In terms of defensive maneuvers, you are able to perform a dodge dash, which allows you to reposition yourself behind enemies when used correctly, though it comes at the cost of your stamina bar, which does replenish on its own after a few seconds, so you need to be mindful of that. Overall, I did enjoy fighting the hordes of enemies thrown at me here, which brought to mind some of the classics in the genre. The only thing that rubbed me the wrong way here was that if an enemy happens to be close to a ring, the chains prioritize said ring instead of the enemy, which can lead to some frustrating battle instances, though this occurrence is quite rare. When it comes to bosses, I'm glad to say that all big bads I got to experience during my playthrough were quite entertaining and appropriately challenging, necessitating quick reflexes and spot-on timing to make sure you weren't decimated, especially considering the scarcity of healing consumables, which were limited to food dropped from breakable objects. All of the villains I clashed against were radically different in shape, mobility, and attack patterns, making it a delight to identify their battle structure and eventually emerge victorious, with huge props going to appropriately telegraphed attacks. This was definitely the standout aspect of Beyond the Ice Palace 2, and a masterclass on how to make tough but fair bosses that may seem terrifying at first, but once you figure them out, it becomes a death dance where you lead. As for difficulty, I'd say it's no stretch to situate Beyond the Ice Palace 2 on the harder side of things, since it maintained a sense of danger and challenge throughout my playthrough, given that all enemies could potentially become nuisances and cause some serious damage if you weren't careful, and there were also certain environmental hazards that could quickly end the less wary player, though here I do have one major grievance that I believe contributes to the game's overall difficulty in an artificial way. As I mentioned previously, following the game's midpoint, it becomes very reliant on platforming, which, as already stated, is far from perfect. That being said, at the same time, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 becomes very stingy with its checkpoints and forces you to move through at times lengthy acrobatic gauntlets where death means starting over, which can lead to incredibly frustrating situations where you need to repeat some nightmarish sections over and over, which in turn leads to tedium. You'll still manage to beat them, and that will come with a huge sense of personal achievement, but I couldn't help the feeling that this decision was made as a way to artificially crank up the challenge so as to lengthen the experience, which is a mentality that rarely works. I'll admit I kind of got a kick out of this difficulty spike in a weird way, but always alongside frustration. As a pro tip here, I'll just say the following. If you end up finding braziers that drop food when broken, said braziers will always drop said piece of food, so in the case where these braziers are near a screen exit, you can move back and forth between the biome screens to fill up your health if you find yourself in a pickle. On to length, it took me a total of 6 hours and 40 minutes to finish the game with about 99% completion rate while missing a single pearl, with an estimated additional 30 minutes to an hour for 100% depending on player observation levels. For a price of about $20, I feel like the game does offer value for its cost, though it cuts it a bit close. On a last note prior to my verdict, I do wish to mention a bug which happened to me once, so that the developers can have a look at it. When inside the manor and after having defeated a mini-boss, I left the room and then decided to re-enter it immediately to check something, only for the screen to load me at the other end of said room and unable to make any movement, at which point I had to restart from my latest checkpoint. In conclusion, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 was a mostly entertaining experience, with the occasional platforming frustration taking away some of its shine. I found the story and lore appropriately dark and slightly deeper than I had anticipated. I had a lot of fun with combat, I thoroughly enjoyed uncovering the game's secret areas, and had a blast with my bouts against the bosses available. Platforming, while an improvement since the preview, still was a drawback for me, and the over-reliance of the second half of the game on this element, along with sparse checkpoints, did frustrate me to an extent, but I still had fun here. Above all, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 feels like a love letter to the olden days of gaming, and while it brings some of the inconveniences of that time to the table, it does more right than wrong, and thus warrants a recommendation. My final verdict on Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is 7 out of 10. What are your thoughts on Beyond the Ice Palace 2? Have you played it yet? Do you agree with the points I mentioned, or do you see things differently? Let me know in the comments below, and please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, Soulsborne Seeker out!